J.K. Rowling is currently sending her armies of Dementors after me, so much so that my name is currently trending at number 25 on Twitter in the UK. So how did I manage to make my experience on Twitter even worse than it usually is? And before I get into this, you are not going to agree with everything I say in this video, and that is a good thing, because biological categories involve thousands of physical factors, and so knowing where to draw the line, knowing what goes on either side of the line, deciding whether or not it's even practical to draw lines, that's always going to involve a degree of personal judgment. So we are never going to get everybody to agree on how they see this, so I think it's helpful for our movement to accept that we're going to have slightly different views as long as we have the common denominator of active empathy for oppressed groups. So let's get into it. I only tend to speak about gender issues when I feel it's an emergency or it's something that I, despite not being from any of the protected groups involved, have the right to speak on. And I felt the Supreme Court ruling in the UK was an emergency because I know that many people on the J.K. Rowling side of things believe that the people on our side of things don't believe in science, that we're denying biology. I see that as the first step in the pipeline towards becoming somebody like J.K. Rowling, and I knew that after the Supreme Court ruling, there would be people on our side of the argument who would say things that the other side would use as proof that we deny biology. And so I made this tweet. Because biological sex and gender are two different things, it's the job of society to decide which areas of life are split based on gender and which are split based on biology. So, the policing of this issue aside, there's nothing inherently wrong with establishing biological sex as the default in law, as long as we have a clear and correct view on where gender applies. This ruling does the former without the latter, only pushes in one direction, which creates the very uncertainty that it was trying to avoid. And in doing so, it hands a huge stick to people who have no empathy for trans people, because after all, that's the main difference between us and people like J.K. Rowling. I said we all agree that trans women are not biological women, but are simply positioning themselves around the framework of a gendered society that they did not create. The main difference is whether you care about what happens to them. And anybody with a conscience should be worried about the backlash that trans people are going to face as a result of this ruling. And I then shared this story from 2022 about a woman who was told to use the men's toilets after being denied entry into the disabled toilets, saying, "Do you think the Supreme Court ruling is going to make women feel more or less anxious about using public toilets?" But then this came up on my feed and I decided to actually poke the bear. I said to J.K. Rowling, responding to an accusation of being Trumpian by using leftist as an insult is definitely a fun strategy. And before you start, I don't take a position on single-sex spaces. No one who has never faced gender or sex-based oppression has the right to hold the keys to those doors. Which is one of the reasons I only touch this issue when I think it's an emergency. And here's where things started to go off the rails, because I had a discussion in my comments where I said, biological sex isn't binary, it's bimodal. For example, if you plotted all the physical criteria that you would usually associate with one sex or the other on a graph, there would be two clear peaks, but intersex people, infertile people, and a whole bunch of hormonal issues mean it's a spectrum. And I used this picture to illustrate the concept of what bimodal means. And unfortunately, that graph was actually made by somebody who appears to not like trans people, and so he went viral by saying, "Hey Femi, you used a graph that was designed to show that sex is not bimodal, and you used it to argue that it is. Ha ha!" And that's where J.K. Rowling decided to chime in, saying, "Hey, look, Femi, you got completely cooked here." And so I was like, well, my tweet on the left gave a biological explanation for how the presence of sex characteristics is too inconsistent for the whole global population to fit on one side of a binary definition, with examples like intersex and genetic anomalies. And on the picture on the right, you've got, "But you used my drawing." And you're siding with the one on the right? To which she responded, "Take the L for fuck's sake." And so I said, again with the reasoned, mature argument, you should write books. And you know what I find really ironic about this is that 7 years ago, J.K. Rowling tweeted about a debate that I had with Nigel Farage, calling me an authoritative man with facts at his fingertips, calmly laying out the reality, and making fun of Nigel Farage for not being able to deny a word of it. And now she's the one debating against me with the argumentative skills of a toddler, while I calmly explain the facts. She's come so far.